morning and happy Saturday. For those of you that are new, welcome. And for those of you that are returning, welcome back to the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, episode number 22, Bill's Corner. My name is Bill, and I'm a airline pilot. I've been an airline pilot for the past 7 years. I hold five FAA type ratings, and currently fly the Boeing 737 for a major U.S. airline. Now, normally at this point in the show, I would introduce my extraordinary co-host, Tommy D of Level Flight Simulations, co-founder of 3 Grid Simulations Group. But unfortunately, as you can probably tell, he hasn't popped up on the screen like he normally does. And that is because Tommy is taking some personal time and having a vacation, well-earned vacation, spending time with family, so he won't be on the show today. Don't worry, it's not like we had a fight. Tommy and I didn't break up. He didn't leave the show. I didn't leave the show. Obviously. But he'll be back for next week's show. But for now, today, we're going to be doing it solo with old Captain Bill. Now, some of you may be disappointed in that. I do apologize, because Tommy is obviously the star of the show. But I'm going to try to make it interesting for you today. But with that being said, our show is largely based off of a discussion type format where Tommy and I are going back and forth when we're talking about news, safety, stand down, jargon, and jiffy. But without Tommy here, unfortunately, I can't really do it back and forth. So our show today is going to be a little bit different than you're used to. That's why it's called Bill's Corner. And just like in the future, if I have to take time off or I'm on vacation, Tommy will be doing Tommy's Corner, which is just like a solo version of the show because the other guest wasn't able, or the other host wasn't able to be on the show. And hey, it happens when it's vacation, family emergencies. Tommy actually, for the first very episode, had a family emergency that he had to go to. So the very first episode was just me and Justin. So with that being said, the format today, like I said, is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be doing the news. We're not going to be doing the safety stand down, jargon and jiffy, because that's all based around the discussion with Tommy D. Without Tommy D, there really is no discussion. But we still have something fun planned today. It is going to be a shorter episode than normal. But what we're going to be talking about today is, since you're just stuck with me, the airline pilot, we're going to talk about some myths. Whether or not the facts about being a pilot, there's some myths out there, misconceptions, and we're going to talk about whether or not they're fact or fiction. And after that, what we're going to do, we're still going to do the live listener or live viewer Q&A on here as well. So if you guys have any questions, definitely leave it in the chat, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitch, Kick, or Twitter, or X, or if you're on TikTok Live, feel free to drop a question or comment into the chat, and I'll be more than happy to answer that after we discuss the myths that we're talking about. So without further ado, let's get into it. So there are a lot of different myths out there that I've heard, and trust me, I have heard a ton as an airline pilot, and some of them are, as I like to say, a little cringeworthy. They're not entirely true. So that's my what I'm trying to do here is to try to go through and kind of disprove some of them. So there's a list. This is from the Points Guy, which ironically is one of the biggest, usually one of the biggest criticizers of the airline industry. Sorry, you're going to see me pausing. Normally, I have time to rehydrate and stuff when Tommy's talking, so you'll see me pausing here every now and then. But normally, the Points Guy is the one that criticized him, but he did have an interesting list of 8, and there's a couple more we'll go over from a separate source from Simple Flying, but 8 common or myths of being a airline pilot or a professional pilot. So the first one is both pilots can't eat the same meal. I've heard this, and it actually depends on the company, so it's not completely a myth, although this article does say it's a myth. Not entirely true. In fact, my last airline actually prohibited us within 6 hours of flight duty or report time. The captain and the first officer could not have the same meal prepared by the same food service until they were off duty. So what that means is we couldn't go to Chipotle and both get chicken burritos, basically. So if the captain went to Chipotle and ordered a chicken burrito, then I could have like a steak burrito or a steak salad or something like that. But the idea was if there was some sort of food poisoning or something going on, we both wouldn't have it. Now that current at my current airline, that doesn't exist. That's actually not a thing because we get crew meals as part of our contract, and a lot of times the captain and I, sometimes we order the same thing, like our chicken meal or the beef tenderloin meal. So a lot of times there are certain instances where we share the same meal. So it's not entirely a myth because some airlines do have that policy, like Envoy did, and that was back when I was there from 2017 to 2021. It's very, very possible that they may have changed it since then, but when I was there, you weren't allowed to eat in the same or the same meal prepared by the same food service as the other pilot within 6 hours of flight duty and during the flight duty period. But that's not the same with my current airline. So not really a myth, but it's kind of half myth, half. It just depends on the airline. All right. And obviously where this came from is, if you haven't seen it, the movie Airplane. Did you have the fish? That's where it's come. That's what's on the article. It's a picture of the movie Airplane. Now, number 2, I get a lot of comments about this as an airline pilot, whether it's in person or if it's in chats or comments on the TikTok videos and stuff like that. It just a lot depends on this, but we need to have perfect vision to be an aviator. That's not true. It's not true. I don't know if you guys can see. And for those of you that probably can't see when you're listening on the podcast on Spotify, I'm pointing to the glasses on my face. So you don't need to have... Now, if you're a military aviator, that might be a little bit different. When you're trying to find fighter jets, it's a little bit different. But when you're like an airline pilot, for example, you can wear glasses. You can wear contacts as well. There's just certain limits that your eyes have to meet in terms of like 2020 and 2030 vision. There's a limit. There's a what's it called, a spectrum of what your eyes can be, as long as it's correctable to 2020. So for example, I'm not blind. These are very thin glasses. I honestly 95% of the time, unless I'm flying or driving at night, I don't have my glasses on, and I can drive at night safely. It's just I do it just to be safe, because astigmatism is probably when it's the worst, is at night. But my point is I have a minor, I want to say this size, like minor nearsightedness, but it's enough where it needs to be corrected to 2020 per the FAA standards. Now, I don't know the standards off the top of my head. I just go, like next month, I'm going to my optometrist for my annual exam and say, I need this corrected to, I always tell them 2015, just a little bit better than 2020. And then I go to my medical the following month. That's my annual thing. So, but if you go to the FAA website for the AME or aeromedical examiner website, there's going to be a chart in to show you what you need to pass, and the vision one is there, and it'll tell you in each eye what it needs to be, and for both eyes what it needs to be as well. And it's also stated with or without glasses. Now, normally when I go to my medical examiner, he always asks me to attempt to do it without my glasses, just in case for some reason I'm able to do it without my glasses, and he can remove that restriction from my medical license. But 9 times out of 10, it's easier for me just to do it with my glasses. Like I said, not blind, but just I need glasses to be able to see the far away stuff. I think that's nearsightedness, if I'm not mistaken. So that is 100% a myth. You don't need perfect vision to be a pilot, period, unless you're trying to be a pilot. That might be a little bit different in the military, but to be like a commercial airline pilot and stuff, we wear glasses all the time. The captain I just flew with wore glasses. I wear glasses when I fly. It's required per my medical. So 100% a myth. Now, number 3, we get free flights. Not entirely true. So when you're an airline pilot, depending on the airline, most airlines provide you with the benefit of being able to fly on standby, space available. So what that means is, like, for example, when I commute to work, I list standby, so I don't have a seat. I'm not paying for a seat or given a free seat. I am waiting to see if like a passenger doesn't show up or a seat doesn't get booked. If there's a seat available, then they'll put me in that seat. But it's also not technically free. We do have to pay taxes on it. It's called what is it called? Imputed taxes. So it's one of those things we don't pay in the moment, but when we pay taxes every year, it goes into part of our imputed income. So we do pay taxes on the ticket. There's other benefits. We do get some discounts if we do want to purchase a ticket. Depends on the airline. It could vary in percentage. But the myth that we actually get free flights is not entirely true. It's free in the sense that it's we're not shelling out of pocket. But like, for example, if I want to, for my airline, if I want to list for a first class standby ticket where I'm standing by for first class, I have to pay a service fee, which is, it depends, but it's anywhere from $15 to $20 when I do that. If I want to pay for a higher listing on a non-company airline, use my reciprocating agreements with them, sometimes it can be up to $30 to be able to list for them. But if I'm listing for my company to fly standby, like in main cabin without an upgrade, it's free in the sense I'm not paying right then, but I do have to pay imputed income tax on it. So it's not entirely free. So once again, it's a perception thing, not 100% a myth, not 100% accurate that we get free flights. Oh yeah, this one's my favorite. I talked about it before. I did a video about Enos Key's video about why airline pilots make so much money. This is a very popular subject because it is a very polarizing subject. You get the people that think that we're just absolutely lazy in the flight deck and don't do anything. We don't deserve the money that we make. and that all we do is just get paid to travel. And then you got the other half, like myself, that I can explain the reason why we make the money that we do and we get paid the way we do. But myth number 4 is the autopilot does all the work. It doesn't. So the autopilot for us is a task saturation reduction tool. So when you're flying a complex jet like the Boeing 737 or any of the 4 jets, including the Boeing 737 that are behind me on the wall, these are all the 4 airplanes that I've flown in my career in the past 7 years. It can get very busy. They're complex aircraft. They're not your simple single engine Piper Cherokees that you use during flight training. You got so many complex systems, and then you throw in the fact that you have passengers and a whole other flight crew and a whole other environment behind the flight deck door behind you that also affects how you fly the airplane. It can get very complicated and very task saturated very quick. The autopilot there is a tool not only for safety, but it helps reduce workload on us so we can focus on the more important things as well. Especially in an emergency, the autopilot's great because we can focus on emergency checklists as well. But the autopilot doesn't always do the work. That's not entirely true. So for me personally, I love hand flying the airplane. So I'll hand fly this as long as we're not super busy. That's the key word, and it's safe. I'll hand fly the airplane usually up to 27 or 28,000 feet, or 15 minutes, whichever one comes first. Usually it takes about 15 minutes to get to about 28,000 feet. The reason 28,000 feet is a number is when you're in RVSM airspace, which is reduced visual separation minimum airspace, it is required that the autopilot does the level off because there's reduced separation between you and aircraft above you. So they want you overshooting and causing a TCAS or a traffic collision advisory, resolution advisory. And to maintain that altitude. So I'll do it up to 28 because technically 29 is RVSM. So if we do have to level off at 290 suddenly, I can do it legally. And the 15 minutes is just the metric. I just try to get at least 15 minutes of hand flying after takeoff as I can, just to practice, just to keep current with hand flying the airplane. Now for approach, that largely varies as well. So approaches, for example, if it's a approach down to minimums, and what that means is that the cloud invisibility is reduced to the very minimum visibility that we need. So on a normal instrument landing system, ILS, that's what we call it, ILS, a standard category 1 landing requires a 200-foot ceiling, so the clouds to be at least 200 feet off the ground, and a minimum of half statute mile of visibility. Some of you may be saying, oh, that sounds like enough. But when you're in a jet going 160, 170 miles an hour towards the ground, it moves a lot quicker than you think. But the point I'm saying is, if it was down to those minimums, I am not hand flying that. I am using the autopilot to make sure that I'm maintaining lateral and a glide path because I can't see the world outside of me. I'm relying on the instruments and the ground navigation system to guide the airplane towards the runway safely. So I use the autopilot to make sure that it's doing that, but also it allows me a better scan to look around the cockpit, make sure everything is set up the way it's supposed to, we're stabilized, confirmed, or everything's configured the way it's supposed to, but also allows me to look for the runway as well. Now, once the runway is in sight, I'll click off the autopilot and click off all the automation and just land it normally. Now, if it's a visual day, like yesterday when I was coming to O'Hare, and it's a completely visual day, a lot depends on what type of approach we're doing. For example, if we are doing the approach into San Francisco for 28 right, 28 left, it's a close-in parallel approach. I'll let the autopilot do a lot of the work up to probably about 500 feet, and then I'll click it off and hand fly and stuff. That's just to make sure I'm not going to go into the non-transgression zone and cause it go around on the other runway or vice versa. It's for traffic conflict. But like in O'Hare yesterday, visual approach, coming down on an offset localizer, which means it's kind of not straight with the runway because it's close to another one. Coming in, usually I'll let the airplane configure. I'll get everything configured, and then once everything's configured and stabilized, I'll click off the autopilot, usually around like anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 feet, and then just hand fly it all the way down. I have found in my experience that hand flying the airplane like that from a higher altitude on the approach allows me to get a better feel for the aircraft and allows me to land the airplane a little bit better. That because you get a better feel for it. But once again, that's because it's in visual conditions, and I can usually see the runway 20 miles out. It's not a 2 minimums approach. So that varies as well. But the point that sorry, that was kind of a tangent, but the point I'm trying to make is that the autopilot doesn't always do the work. The autopilot is a tool that we are trained to use to help with safety and task saturation reduction. It helps us maintain an even work balance and focus balance in the cockpit while we're doing and we're busy. A perfect example coming in O'Hare yesterday, we were holding, there was weather, we were doing fuel calculations, all sorts of things. And it was better that the two of us were just monitoring the autopilot, doing the hold for us, and while we're calculating numbers, versus one of us trying to maintain a hold in a transport category airplane with weather nearby and with other airplanes stacked with us. Every 1,000 feet there was an airplane. And then the other person trying to do all the work. So it helps with the workload in the actual airplane. Now, the next myth is, this one's huge. I always get this too. The next myth is we always fly the same route. Now, this largely comes from TV shows. So, for example, one of my favorite airline TV shows of all time is LA to Vegas. I absolutely love that show. But the problem with that is it creates the misconception that we only fly one route, and that's not entirely true. We fly, each month is different. There's an exception to that, and I'll explain it here in a second, but normally we don't. Each month is a different schedule. I'll never have the same overnights in a row, and I won't ever have the exact same schedule this month as I will next month, and so on and so forth. There's a possibility where if it's the same sequence or trip, that might get thrown on my schedule as it was, but very rarely, because the demand's changing and the schedule changes every month, is very rarely does that actually happen. Now, there is one exception. I did say this, and it's just because my bid preference. Last summer, for 6 weeks straight, I was flying into Sacramento on Saturday evening, and then I would stay pretty much all day Sunday and leave out Sunday night and do the Sacramento to Chicago red eye. I did that for 6 weeks straight. It wasn't the same trip like before that. Like, I would go to different cities at the beginning of the trip, but always would end up on my last overnight on night 3 in Sacramento to be able to do that. And it was funny because I got to know a bartender there because I would ask him for coffee. Because late at night there's usually not coffee, and they got to know my order and stuff, and I got to know like the doorman and stuff like that. And she asked me, she said, "I thought airline pilots don't have routes. That's what you always tell me." And I said, "Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we don't always fly the exact same route." And she goes, "But you've been here for the past 6 weeks doing on every Sunday night, and because I'm getting you coffee every Sunday night." And I said, "Oh, well, okay, that's a fair point, but what's happening is bidding wise, it just happened to work out that way because I don't mind red eyes on the backside of my trips. What's happening is on the first 2 nights, I'm going to different places each month or each week, but at the very tail end, I was just constantly doing the Sacramento to Chicago red eye. So it's not a intentional thing. The Sacramento Chicago red eye wasn't my route. It just happened to show up on my schedule that way based off my bid preferences from the month prior. So not entirely true here in the U.S. that we always fly the same route. Now, number 6, we aren't affected as badly by jet lag. That is not true. We get used to it. But for example, I'm in the Midwest, so we're in the central time zone. Anytime we're going west to the West Coast is better for me in the mornings because I get technically more sleep. My body feels like it's later in the day. But the red eyes and the late night stuff kind of or the late afternoons kind of stink because my body thinks it's later in the day. Versus the East Coast, it's the opposite. It's the exact opposite. So it just depends. You do get used to it, but if you're doing trips where you're bouncing back and forth doing transcons from the West Coast to the East Coast, the West Coast to the East Coast, you do start feeling on the body because your body clock doesn't really know where it's set at. It's just kind of all over the place by a couple hours. So we're human beings as pilots, and we are subjected more and more to the changes in time zones, but we're just as susceptible to jet lag as a standard passenger. Number 7, pilots breathe different air from the passengers. Not true. It depends on the airplane. More modern airplanes like the 787 have a different type of air system than, say, the 737, but we all breathe the same air. It all comes from the same system. What's different is there is a pack, or what is called a preconditioned air kit, basically, or PAC kit. What's what we call a pack. And there's one that cools the cabin, and there's one that cools the passenger cabin. The right pack generally cools the passenger cabin. The left pack cools our instruments and us in the flight deck. But the air is from the same place. They just get distributed afterwards, if that makes sense. So the source of air is still from the bleed engine, or the engine bleed taps in the engines, which we talked about. I did a TikTok video explaining that a couple weeks ago. But it's from the same source. We don't actually breathe different air. It's still from the engine or the compressor stages where it receives high pressure bleed air for the air system. Number 8, pilots are paid really well. This depends. I hate to say it depends. back like a couple years ago, well, heck, even when I started at Envoy, when I interviewed at Envoy, we were only getting paid $25 an hour to sit in the right seat. Now, $25 an hour sounds a lot, right, compared to a lot of jobs. But you also got to consider you're working weekends, you're on reserve for a lot of that, and you're responsible for people's lives. You're a professional, right? You're professional getting paid $25 an hour. Not a whole lot nowadays. It's different because the contracts are finally starting to, I guess, more adjust to the cost of life, or COLAs, right? Cost of life adjustments. Or cost of living, not life, cost of living adjustments. But they're still not overly paid. And I did explain this once again, the Inniskey video response. They were saying, we only work like maybe 80 hours a month versus the average person works about 160 for a normal 9 to 5. But the point made, and that I made in that, and I'll still hold to this day, is that's only flight time. So we only get paid when the doors are closed and the parking brake is released. And as soon as we park the airplane and that first door opens, whether it's the cargo door or the main cabin door, that's when we stop getting paid. We don't get paid for airport sits. We don't get paid for our pre-flight duties. When we're in there setting up the cockpit or saying goodbye to you when you're leaving the airplane and being deplaned, none of us are getting paid for that. That's all free time. If there's a delay in the airport and we're sitting 6 hours, which I've had, waiting for the airplane to get fixed or having a new airplane flown in, we don't get paid for that. So realistically, we get paid 80 hours of flight time, but we're actually away from home. I'd say on average for me, minimum is 300 hours. So I only get paid a fraction. So if I'm lucky, like right now this year, I'm averaging about 70 hours a month of pay, but I'm away from home 300 to 400 hours a month. So that kind of puts it into scale. Now, don't get me wrong, where it's compared to other jobs, it could be worse. I'm not saying we don't get paid really well, but if you consider how much we actually work, how much we're actually away from home compared to what we actually get paid, it's nowhere near what we should be getting paid. Anyways. All right, and there is two more. That was number 8. Two more. One is that airline pilots, captains and first officers don't have equal duties, which is it's not true. It really isn't. So the common myth right now, let me just pull it up real quick. The common myth right now is that the captain is the one that always does the flying, and that's not entirely true. We take turns, and once again, I did a TikTok video discussing this, but it's funny. A lot of people just assume the first officer is there to assist, which we are, but we take turns. So like if a captain flies from Chicago to Orlando, then I'll fly the next leg Orlando to Denver, and then the next day we get up and we're doing like Denver to Anchorage, and they'll do Denver to Anchorage, and then I'll fly the next leg. Just as equal, but on the ground it's a little bit different. So on the ground we have set duties as a captain, as a first officer. On the ground, before we take off or get onto the runway, I'm always working the radios. I'm the one starting the engines. I'm doing everything but taxi the airplane because it's the captain's sole responsibility to get you to and from the runway safely. And it's my job to assist in that with working radios and doing all the other stuff that doesn't have to do with moving the aircraft along the ground. Now, once we get on the runway, that's where the roles change. That's where we go into pilot flying, pilot monitoring roles. So pilot flying is the person who's actually been manipulating and flying the airplane, and pilot monitoring does everything else. So that's like radios, paperwork, and all that sort of stuff. So once again, we take turns. So let's say I'm a first officer and it's my turn to fly. Well, the captain will taxi out to the runway. I'll work the radios and everything on the ground, start the engines, do the flaps, do the help run the checklist, stuff like that. Then once I get out on the runway and it's my turn to fly, once the captain has the aircraft aligned with the runway, right, because he's or she is responsible for lining up that aircraft on the runway, the captain will say, all right, your controls, and I will say my controls to give positive exchange of flight controls, and then guess what? It's my turn to fly. So I take off. I fly us all the way to where we're going. I land the airplane, and then around 60 to 80 knots, the captain will come on the controls with me and say, my aircraft. And I'd say, your aircraft. And then the captain resumes the controls of the aircraft and then taxis the aircraft from the runway to the gate. And I am doing all the after landing checklist and procedures to prepare us to get to the gate and turn around and do another flight. So on the ground, it's fixed. In the air, we can change between pilot flying and pilot monitoring. And then finally, being a pilot is high responsibility, but not necessarily high stress due to robust training and efficient handling of potential issues. I like it depends on the day. I always say my perfect day is a mundane day. Like when my wife calls and says, "How was your day?" and I said boring, that's a good thing. We are trained to handle a variety of emergencies. We run lots of checklists and stuff like that as well. But the thing is, it can be high stress. So for this last week, for example, coming into O'Hare, a final leg, we're getting holding. I think our alternate was Detroit, so we only had about 45 minutes of holding fuel. And we were trying to get into O'Hare, so we're working with our dispatchers through text message to try to figure out if we can get maybe like Indianapolis, a closer alternate to allow us more fuel to hold and stuff like that. So there is a little stress built into it, but it's something you kind of get used to as well. So it is high stress, but it's just we're trained to handle the stress, if that makes sense. We're trained how to methodically prioritize and do what we need to do, right? So aviate, navigate, communicate. We're usually to simplify it. So that's not really too hard to do. So it's kind of a myth. Once again, a lot of these are kind of like 50-50, depending on how you look at them, because being a pilot is high responsibility. There is a sense of high responsibility because we got you guys in the back. That's the whole point. We're trying to get you from point A to point B safely, and that always weighs on our decisions, and we are aware of that. And yes, it can be high stress, but we're trained. Because of our training, we're able to handle it pretty simply. So with that, those are 10 airline myths, and we've kind of talked about them. It depends. A lot of it depends. Sometimes they're about 50-50 true, but a lot of them aren't entirely true based on them. So that's 10. We talked about our pilots paid well. Let's see. Or both pilots can't eat the same meal. We need to have perfect visions, which is not true. We get free flights, not true. The autopilot does all the work, definitely not true. We always fly the same route, not true. We aren't affected as badly by jet lag, not true. Pilots breathe a different air from passengers, not true. And then also those two myths we just talked about with the duties of the captain and first officer, and also being a pilot is high responsibility, but not necessarily high stress due to the robust training and efficient handling of potential issues. So with that will conclude our discussion. It's not really a discussion because Tommy D's not here, but we will definitely move on to our viewer Q&A here. I'll pull that up here. Let's see. No clue. Let's see. From Flying with Caden. Let's see. Wow, no clue you're even allowed to hand fly that long. Yeah. I've heard rumors that companies and centers for autopilot usage. It depends. So, like, our manual does say that if the visibility is less than 3/4 of a mile or 4,000 feet visual range, to fly using the autopilot. And we're told, in not high stake, but like high risk situations like low visibility approaches down to Cat 1 minimums, it's suggested we can hand fly the approach, but it's suggested that we use the autopilot to help reduce with task workload saturation. So thank you, Caden, for the comment. I appreciate it. Let's see. We got some good activity over here in TikTok. Let me pull up that real quick. Let's see. Bring back the SAFs content. Yeah, Mateo, that's the plan here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Not like I said, usually most people are here to see Tommy D and I. But unfortunately, like I said, unfortunately for me, fortunately for Tommy, Tommy's taking a little bit of time off today. So it's just me today. Like I said, short episode, nice short episode with Bill's Corner. So I just want to thank you all for watching. This is going to conclude episode number 22, Bill's Corner, talking about pilot myths, whether or not they're truth or fact. If you want to follow us, we are available on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, and Kick. You can follow us on Twitter at Torque and Thrust Talk Show. And I'm Captain Bill Official on all social media, and Tommy D is Level Flight Simulations on YouTube, Twitch. I think he's on Kick as well. And then the Torque and Thrust Talk Show on Twitter is at Torque, the letter N, Thrust, TS, Torque and Thrust Talk Show. We go live there. We go live all week on all those different ones. So if you have a preference on which platform, that's the way to look. But with that being said, also, if you guys are enjoying the show, whether it's this episode or the past 21 episodes that we've done, we've had some great ones. Episode 14, Antitrust, is a good one. The one that we did a couple weeks ago, April Showers Bring May Ghosts, was another good one. So if you are really enjoying that, we would love if you guys left us a review. If you're on Spotify, up towards the top next to the notification bell, there is a 3-dot menu. If you click on that, you'll see something that says Rate Show, and please give us a rating. If you're on Apple Podcasts, just go to the main main show page. Scroll all the way down, and there'll be some stars you can fill in. And the reason is Tommy and I last year in December of 23, we were the top 60. We were number 57 or 58 aviation podcast in the world. So we want to try to work our way back up there. Obviously, we've kind of fallen down the charts because while I was moving and into my new house stuff, we weren't doing the talk show. So if you do, and you're watching live on TikTok or on Twitch, YouTube, Kick, or Twitter, and you also like this, just please go to Spotify. You can just type in Torque and the symbol and Thrust Talk Show. Go find us and rate us there too. We would greatly appreciate it. Now, our next live show will be Saturday, June 2nd, 2024 at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. And don't you worry, we should be back to our normal segments. It's going to be, Tommy's going to be back. So it's going to be a little bit easier to go through with a full show. But with that being said, for those of you that have joined us on live, I do appreciate you all joining us. I look forward to seeing you next week. And on behalf of the Torque and Trust, let me try that again. On behalf of the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, I am Bill, and we will see you next week.